This meeting is being live streamed. Yes, it is.
Right. Okay. Well, we must be being live streamed then. I also need to put it on Facebook. Can I not do that? I can only do one at a time, I think. So we'll just be on YouTube, and we'll have to take out the references to Facebook another time. Okay.
Okay.
Hello to anybody that might have joined us either live or later, when presumably it stays on our YouTube channel. My name's John Bigger, and I am speaking from Loughborough. And I've been writing about British politics for freedom for about 10 years now. And I also teach British politics to A-level students. But that's not enough about me. Let's introduce the other people here. So, do you want to start, Mr. Gordon?
That's Dr. Gordon for you. Hi,
Yes, true.
everybody. And you are also, but I bet there's more PhDs between us than the ants on my carpet. Um, my name is Dr. Gordon. I'm editor of Freedom News. Been working with Freedom since the last book fair. First as international editor, now as editor, and working a lot to expand our team and expand our audience.
Excellent. Who wants to go next? Simon.
You have to take a lead. Tell the anarchists what to do.
Yeah, I'm Simon. I am mostly involved in the publishing side of freedom.
Rhiannon.
Hi, I'm Rhiannon. I'm an academic and a writer who's interested in anarchism and utopianism.
And Lucas. Your microphone is off, I think. Oh, there we are.
Yes, I am Lucas. I am currently in the Kingdom of Sweden in Stockholm, which is where I've lived for almost 20 years. I'm involved in freedom in the editorial working group along with Uri, and I guess I've been an anarchist since I was a teenager.
Not sure how long I've been an anarchist for. That's a really tricky thing because I spent some time working for the British government as well, which is a bit weird. But there we go. I got thrown out basically for organising strikes, so I seem to have earned some kind of kudos on that basis. Uri, why are we doing these broadcasts? Why are we talking like this about elections when we don't agree with the state? What's
I
going
don't
on?
know. You know what? Let's start with why we're doing the podcast. Well, actually, this is like a sandbox in the playground for us. Freedom has been for most of its life a print paper. Now we're an online daily and a semi-annual magazine. And so as we get digital, we thought we'd also play around with this format. This is apparently something that a lot of people do. There is such a thing as YouTubers and influencers and live streamers, and there's Twitch and there's Substack and there's all kinds of different platforms, all kinds of people doing weird and wonderful stuff. The real reason, the real excuse is that, it gives us a way to have much more direct audience interaction in real time. And I think part of the advantage of live platforms like these is that they really allow, people who have similar interests to us to come on and, add comments and interact and create a conversation. I mean, I think that, we're never going to do this by way of a panel punditry, mainstream media imitating kind of format. We want to do something different. And for me, part of that something different is, of course, about the content and about it trying to bring anarchist perspectives into the conversation. But a big part of it is about making it somehow even a bit more collective, a bit more of an conversation event that's okay. It's online, but that means that can involve people from around the country, away for freedom to, um, move beyond just the kind of live in the flesh formats that it can do within London. But this can be a bit wider. So that's about the format, and we're really playing with this, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of glitches, and maybe after we finish this, we'll press play and say it hasn't recorded, it's not even gone online. But that's the nature of it, and we're doing this kind of as a pre-election conversation as well. That'll also be a technical dry run for the technical wet run for the election night event itself. And this is the time to mention that on the evening of the 4th of July, we or a panel of similar composition is also going to be here, sort of following the results live as they come in, bringing in some guest speakers, hopefully, and having, maybe a bit more of an enjoyable broadcast for election night than what comrades are going to find on mainstream television.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe we should start doing an anarchist version of the Eurovision as well. Nah.
well,
All right. And now then about elections. Well, what am I going to tell you? There's anarchists tend to be strange election geeks, right? I mean, with all of our rejection of electoral politics, the state, some anarchists just really enjoy the sort of opportunities for political analysis that brings, both in terms of the opportunities or challenges and dangers that it might create for social movements, and in terms of what it's telling us about the societies in which we live. So, you don't have to have any sort of agreement or desire to promote electoral politics in order to follow it for the kind of insights that it can give us as grassroots movements, as direct action promoters, as people who organize autonomously. And sometimes it's a bit of a combination of horror and farce, which are two sentiments that I think the British viewing public in particular have become very accustomed to in recent years when it comes to the mainstream theater of politics. But I think the other thing is that there are always the issues and the realities of the society that we live in that get sidelined in mainstream coverage of election manifestos, of pledges, of, who lied about that detail and who may have given some money or gotten some money from the wrong source, while what gets lost is the very large overlap between certainly the two major UK parties on, the basic issues of society, its functioning, the complete lack of dissensus around private ownership, economic growth, which is being promoted as if we're not on a finite planet, and just like everything that environmentalists have been saying for 40 years in through one ear out the other. The sort of stuckness of the major parties within a nationalist narrative, the way in which the labor alternative has been mainly trying to compete for Tory demographics, and therefore pretending, but not really pretending, to be almost as right wing. And what happens is that masks tend to get stuck to the face. So it's these kind of analyses, these kinds of, anarchist takes on electoral politics that, people are not going to get anywhere else when it comes to the UK at this point. So, even for the sake of that, I think it's worth dealing in the muck.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, this is about the official people tell us that this is about the people. This is about the public getting involved. But actually, this is away from people's communities, isn't it? It's in politicians deciding what they want to do in the future. And it's so narrow.
I think this is
the people that are going to come in. And it makes it really problematic. But I just wanted to say something about the broadcasts as well, because I've seen in the official, like the mainstream media, let's say, people are already describing this as a post-television election, the first post-television election. And so this format, I think, fits into that perfectly. It's fine on that front. And also, we want people's comments. If they are watching on YouTube, they should be able to comment, and we can interact with people because we haven't got all of the answers. We're just human beings, aren't we? You know, we might just be a bit more, I don't know, we might be more engaged in electoral politics than we should be. I don't know. It's all a bit weird.
Yeah, no, this is a good time to say, you know, and we will be repeating this once in a while during this and the next and further broadcasts. If you're with us, do say something in the comments, do ask questions or vent or pick up on points or, you know, any kind of feedback that we can get. And of course, subscribe and like and support and all those other things that we're supposed to ask you to click and whatever else.
And be kind to us. Be horrible about the politicians, but be kind to us, you know. Before we carry on, can I just ask people, I want you to ask people how excited they are on a scale of 1 to 5 stars in the election campaign. How much are you following it? Do you want to start, Ori?
Well, I mean, I'm following it because I follow the news as a regular thing, but it's not exactly something that causes me excitement. I mean, I think there is a sense that perhaps Labour as a government will not be quite as awful as the Tories have been. There will perhaps be a bit less performative cruelty, perhaps a bit less nationalist sort of baiting of minorities. But we know that you know, Labour is a neoliberal party. It is a party that has done everything it can to distance itself from any kind of socialist or state socialist or quasi-socialist roots. Some say that the Labour Party, with its kind of Fabian foundations, was always a distraction away from working class politics. But I think that, you know, I feel a little bit sometimes like, you know, if you've had a dive quite low and you're coming to the surface and the air is kind of scant, those last seconds before you feel like you might get something to breathe. But, you know, as people know, I grew up in Israel and everywhere is going to shit right now, there and elsewhere. So in perspective, I mean, this is the country I live in. My experience is that, you know, or the way I've read history in the 20th century is that there are actually more openings for dissent and social movements under reformist governments or under, you know, governments of the so-called left or the complicit left or the center, or call it what you want. I'm definitely not one who holds to the worse the better theory. But we have to also, you know, keep our eyes on the big picture, and that's a big picture of a global permanent war with, you know, more and more sort of hotspots, wars of attrition in Ukraine, in Gaza, in, you know, in Southeast Mexico, for that matter, in Sudan, in Burma, Myanmar. All of these things are just kind of going on and increasing, and all of this is part of the even larger picture of, you know, the process of the collapse of industrial civilization and of the biosphere, which has already begun. So, you know, for people, for those anarchists to do keep their eyes on that, the vicissitudes of British politics within that very narrow amplitude of a two-party system can't be very exciting, can it?
No, I flippantly asked you to give it a rating out of 5 stars, and then you just destroyed everything by talking about how awful the world is. You know, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Rhiannon, how interested are you in the campaign?
So basically, until I was invited to do this, I hadn't engaged with anything at all. I don't own a television. I usually keep up with the news, but I sort of vary depending on my mood between having, I have the radio on all the time in bed and stuff, and I vary between having it on Radio 6 for music or Radio 4, in which if I'm in a Radio 4 mode, I keep up with the news a bit better. But I was actually in Radio 6 mode until I was invited to do this, and I have been for several months. So I've switched over to Radio 4 now because I thought, oh God, I better swat up for this Anarchist broadcasting, and I've watched a couple of the debates now, and I've based my style on Daisy Cooper from the 7-person debate the other day. I had this anyway, but I just thought it'd be funny.
So normally you're not someone who engages much in electoral politics.
I don't know. I think I previously have done a lot more before. So I think some elections I have been a lot more interested in. This one just seemed to happen quite quickly, and it seems almost like a foregone conclusion. And
Yeah.
I mean, Starmer, I've sort of formed my opinions of him quite a long time ago. I mean, I don't know. His sort of haunted loaf of bread is the funniest thing I've heard said about him, I think. But yeah, he's all right. You know, I don't know. I just struggled to get excited about this one. And then I've watched some of the debates and some of the Sunak boo-boos and things like that. And I am struggling to get as excited about it as I have about previous elections. And I don't know why that is. I mean, I sort of, I might vote Labour. I don't know, but I was brought up by a family where you just have to vote Labour, like you have to.
Yeah.
It's kind of a visceral thing that I just feel like I have to out of some bizarre loyalty to my mum and stuff like that. And it's, my family are all sort of trade union activists from Glasgow, and even without even having lost faith in all of it, there's still some kind of weird visceral loyalty that I sometimes go with, but I don't know. And then also with the Green Party, I've kind of I've been interested in how some things that sort of seem a bit more radical than we're used to have entered their discourse, things like rent controls and stuff like that. I mean, it's all kind of reformist left-wing stuff, and the Green Party are incredibly neoliberal along with everyone else, but I'd like the idea of the Overton window shifting a very tiny bit, I suppose. And like Uri was saying, the idea that that it will create space for more social movement activity and stuff like that. But then also I find a lot of the kind of Labour sort of leftist discourse incredibly oppressive and almost sort of totalitarian sometimes as well. So sometimes that can also be scary in the ways it infiltrates into social movements and things too. So I really don't know. I mean, to be honest, I hadn't really thought about any of it until I was invited to do this, and then I've suddenly started swatting up on it all. And
well, there's method to this. I thought, you've written about COVID and you've written about disaster, anarchy, and I just think the last 14 years have involved quite a lot of problems. We could think of austerity like that as well. I don't know how you feel about that. Do you feel as though austerity was an example where communities started to do things for themselves? Was it that sort of response?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think I mean, I'm interested in elections to the extent that how does it connect to social movements and what kind of opportunities will it create for social movements? And, Jeremy Corbyn, for example, was connected to a sort of huge social movement that was interested in him. I mean, one of the things I found in my work on disaster anarchy was that a lot of those people were actually coming into conflict with anarchists because they were sort of very reformist on the ground, and they were sort of wanting a certain kind of policing of mutual aid, in a way, a de-radicalizing of mutual aid and depoliticizing of mutual aid, while anarchists wanted to be involved in more radical things like eviction resistances and things like that. And the sort of this disillusioned Corbyn movement was joining this kind of radical movement and, in a sense, de-radicalizing it. And it's interesting how electoral politics and social movements are associated with or not sort of interact, especially with anarchists, I suppose.
We saw a lot of people kind of leave the anarchist movement, didn't we, as well, and move over to Momentum and get involved with Corbyn, which was, I think, a rather odd thing to do. But they did, and maybe some of them have come back, and maybe some of them haven't. I don't know. Okay, Simon, what is your impression of the campaign so far? Are you excited?
I mean, I've been enjoying quite a lot of it. Not because I expect any significant change to happen, but just because there's been an awful lot of comedy and unintentional comedy and pratfalling, and like even just starting out with Rishi Sunak being sort of standing there in a deluge and just being, and my day job is doing headlines for newspapers, and it's just these people writing their own headlines in the worst possible way. It's been fantastic. I've been really enjoying it. I mean, from an anarchist perspective, I'm a habitual non-voter, and this year is no different, particularly in part because I'm in my where I vote is so solidly Labour that there's literally nothing, no change is going to happen regardless of whether I vote or not. It's been interesting. In previous elections, and obviously particularly in 2019, there was an absolute rage going on from sort of the electoral left aimed at anarchists, which I always found odd, because there's not very many of us, and there's considerably lower hanging fruits that you can aim for when you're going on a whole, you definitely have to get out and definitely have to vote Labour kind of thing. I mean, my perspective has always been, if you feel that voting is important to you, then just vote. It doesn't matter to me. But yeah, like as a non-voter, I've had, decades now of people going, oh, you don't care about people because you don't vote. And it's like, well, I care about people all the time. It's not just on vote day, But
if you
this
don't
year it's
vote
been
Labour,
incredibly
you're actually
muted.
voting Tory.
But this year there's not really been any of that. I think the level of enthusiasm for voting that the left has is essentially at as close to zero as it gets, really. And you can see why. I mean, Keir Starmer, I don't think there is a figure that is more designed to wind up the electoral left than Keir Starmer. Someone who played the loyal cadre under Corbyn and then just relentlessly betrayed everything about what he'd been presenting himself as for 4 years now.
I mean, I remember writing some things about Jeremy Corbyn when he was leader of the Labour Party, really critical stuff. But I think he's been treated terribly, as a human being. Starmer is ruthless, isn't he? He's absolutely ruthless. Doesn't care at all. The way he's talked about moving the Labour Party on, and he never really says how he's changed the Labour Party. What he means is he's got his people in. That's kind of what it means. But I was just struck by what you said there about people arguing, the left arguing, anarchists are a problem. It takes me back 9 years. I won't go on about myself too much because this is all about you lot, really. But when I stood for class war in the 2015 election, I had Labour supporters ask me, well, what if that means that Labour won't get in your area because you're going to get all of these votes? I ended up with 65 votes in total. It's not like we were standing to try and get elected or to thwart the Labour Party. We were standing because we wanted to have a bit of fun. So, I think a lot of people on the left take themselves just a little bit too seriously, don't they? Really. Sorry, Simon.
Oh no, I was just going to say that I think it's also there's a kind of voting as a kind of totem which goes beyond any kind of strategic analysis of the situation. Like, if I'm in a Labour stronghold that's been Labour the entire time it's existed, I will still get told off for not voting, and it's because there is a moral imperative to vote, not because there's any actual feeling that my vote matters under those circumstances.
Yeah. For the first time in my life, I'm actually in a marginal constituency in Loughborough. It tends to vote for the party that gets into Downing Street. So at the moment, it is Conservative, and there is a chance it will switch to Labour. So that gives me something to think about, doesn't it? People can guess what I'm going to do. Lucas, how excited are you about the whole thing?
Yes, I am loving it. There's an old quote, I think it's attributed to George Orwell: if we can't get revolution, we might just settle for revenge. And right now, this feels like a certain amount of revenge. Now, cascading over what used to be called the natural party of government. I mean, they were like the most disciplined party of the ruling class, utterly efficient, and they're in catastrophic disarray. And it's amazing fun to watch because it also indicates that, well, no one is unbeatable, and they're all fatally flawed internally. So that's a huge amount of fun. But I think it's important. I agree with what Simon said about this totemic voting thing. I mean, I'm excited now, but like the last time I voted was in 1997, and then Tony Blair got in, and I thought, whoops, well, I better not do that again. But and it's not like I'm very excited right now, but I don't see it as totemic. I see it as being brutally pragmatic. And to pick up on what Rhiannon said about disasters, and Uri as well, like about the fact that we're living in an ongoing disaster. When I look at Labour, I think, well, will Labour give us anything better to salvage from the disaster? And so I'm thinking, well, I'd rather live through a collapse with a few more solar panels than one without a few more solar panels. Because if we're going to be out there in our Mad Max electric vehicle convoy scavenging stuff, then yes, it is marginally better to have like a functioning infrastructure. There's a guy who's from the Soviet Union, Dmitry Orlov, and he used to say the Soviet Union was very good at collapsing, had a lot of stable infrastructure. If the Soviet Union collapses, but everything keeps on working because nobody believed in it. Doesn't matter. Money was meaningless. The trains still keep on running. And he's like, if imagine if Los Angeles collapses, cars stop working, everyone dies. So yes, let's have a collapse with slightly better infrastructure, please, because it'll be slightly more cushy. So that's the positive thing that I'm looking forward to. I don't know whether it'll happen, but I think in general we're seeing a macro turn towards the return of the state, red in tooth and claw, but also building roads just like the Romans did to march armies down. But that's not really due to the whatever happens in this election. It's about long-term trends that have already happened. Financial crisis and other things pulling the rug out from underneath the last dregs of neoliberalism, Russian invasion of Ukraine, return to great power conflict, heavy industry. And so Keir Starmer will just be continuing these macro trends. And some of them you can see that Sunak has already started, like getting closer to the EU, and Starmer will just continue that. So yeah, I'm having a great time, and I'm looking forward to what we say in Sweden, picking out the raisins, like finding the small pieces of goodness
Pearl in the
among the
swill.
badness. Yeah, I guess so.
I'd like
yeah, this is great fun to talk about it as well.
Yeah. I think on the night, if things go the way the polls are suggesting, and the polls are correct, we are going to see a lot of Tories lose their roles in our society and in our politics, at least. They might hang around in our society, unfortunately. But it's going to be an entertaining evening if things, if those polls are correct. But I wanted to bring Rhiannon back in because I was just thinking about, and this idea that we're living in a kind of permanent disaster. Is Labour kind of some of the things that Labour are doing, criticising the Tories for 14 years of, austerity and destroying the economy and stuff like that? Are Labour perhaps actually kind of saying a sort of similar thing to us, but without offering the sort of solutions we would like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know I really don't know what difference that it's going to make if Labour get in, if it'll be a big one or not in terms of austerity. I mean, it seems like the economy is going to keep going from bad to worse, and I don't know.
Yeah, it's difficult. It is difficult to say, but the language that they're talking is certainly, everything that's happened in the last 14 years is terrible, and we're going to do a better job. I don't know if
Through
anybody else
economic growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
That
Yeah,
you want totems. That is the big totem.
Is
Well,
it
that's the
achievable?
Labour thing. That's the general social democratic thing. We're going to get capitalism working so well that there's going to be jam and gravy and butter for everybody, and everybody's boats will be floating in gravy. It's going to be amazing. So no one will have to worry about redistribution or any kind of political conflict over wealth because there'll just be so much of it.
Yeah. The other thing I'm kind of wondering about is have we forgotten about COVID very quickly? Is COVID something that we've just kind of, as a society, forgiven the Tories for the way they handled it, or is it something that just doesn't matter to people anymore?
I think there's a lot of wanting to not think about it, which has been going on since actually quite not far into when COVID started. People started not wanting to think about it. Obviously the more head in the sand types got very active in terms of being like, oh, we shouldn't wear masks, and oh, this is actually just a conspiracy to lock us all down and all this kind of stuff. But the general trend, I think, in the general public has been not wanting to really address, because as with so many of the potentially civilization ending things which have been occurring over the last decade or so, or two or three, there's a strong element of people just wanting to kind of get on with everyday life, and particularly when everyday life is actually getting harder, right? Like there is a slow trend of everybody finding life more difficult for one reason or another. And the last thing you want when life is difficult already is to be having to think about, oh God, am I going to have to spend the next 2, is there going to be another pandemic surge? Is there going to be another massive storm or whatever, another economic crash? It's sort of, people don't want to think about this sort of thing. And I think the media is very aware of this and complicit, both in terms of following where the public wants to go, but also, what's best for the ruling class is for us not to really think about this sort of thing, or get angry about it, or get active about it.
Yeah, I suppose though, like things like all the mutual aid stuff that was started during COVID because of that disaster, the moment the state steps in and people feel more comfortable again, it kind of goes, doesn't it? I don't know how you feel about that, Rhiannon.
Sorry, I was listening, but I didn't quite understand what you said. The moment
the state steps in and produces some kind of solution to COVID, a lockdown or furlough or whatever, do people start to kind of not need the mutual aid, or does it just dissipate? I don't know how it works,
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think what I was interested in was more about how the kind of discourse of mutual aid being a form of social capital and things like that, and the way in which it was sort of turned into this performative kind of clapping outside the doors and things like that. And yeah, there is this thing where sort of in all disasters, whether it's a sort of long, sort of slow burn disaster like COVID, or whether it's a sort of massive rupture like an earthquake or a hurricane or something, people, that it's actually a conservative idea that sort of people roll up their sleeves and sort of get together to help each other. And then the kind of conservative idea is that that they need a specialized bureaucracy to kind of step in and organize them. Otherwise, they all sort of turn into this Hobbesian kind of, there's this brief period where everyone helps out, and then eventually it will turn into this kind of Hobbesian war of all against all, unless the state sort of steps in to organize them. So there's this kind of, disaster policy is all built around the idea that these specialized agencies, which are actually generic, they don't have specialisms in particular disasters, they're generic for any disasters, which I think is quite interesting. Things like COBRA, the Cabinet Office briefing rooms and things like that, and FEMA in the States and stuff like that. The idea is that these people are sort of specialists in disaster management, contingency planning, all that kind of thing. And they're there to kind of coordinate the autonomous groups in society that do the labor. There are people needed to do the labor to patch things up when there's a disaster. And there's this kind of discourse of kind of social capital and things like that, and co-opting the groups into a completely depoliticized idea of this, which is a kind of discourse and an ideology that anarchists I spoke to during COVID-19 felt was being adopted by, like I said, there was this kind of disillusioned reformist Corbynite movement that entered the kind of the social movement activism that was going on at the time. And I think a lot of the people I spoke to were more angry with Labour councillors and Labour activists during that time than they were with the Conservative government, because they felt like those people on the ground were inhibiting their actions, and inhibiting their movements from being as radical as they would usually like them to be. And I mean, that's a purposeful state policy to kind of make social movement activity either legible as a form of social capital or seen as something to be criminalized and securitized against, which splits movements into the kind of domesticated sort of white middle class kind of elements of mutual aid who just want of social movements. But during the COVID crisis, they wanted mutual aid to be about shopping and helping neighbours and clapping for carers and things like that. And then there's a sort of more often sort of classed, racialized, radicalized sort of aspect of movements which is securitized against and criminalized, if you see what I mean. So it will be portrayed as disruptive in some way, or people that were breaking lockdown, that were spreading the disease and this, that and the other, and because they were going to protests or whatever.
Interesting. I think I agree with an awful lot of that. I want to move on to kind of like the campaign and where things have been in the last 3 weeks. It's 3 weeks to go until the election, and we've had 3 weeks and a day of the campaign. And Simon mentioned Rishi Sunak standing in the rain, announcing an election that he didn't need to announce just yet, but he decided to. Got wet in the process and had things can only get better being blared out at the same time, drowning out his words. And then, of course, last week he was in Normandy at the D-Day commemorations, which he left early, and that caused an awful lot of furore around him. Really, to be honest, I think he's had the worst election campaign of any of the major parties that I've seen in my life. I think it's just astonishing. I don't know how everybody else feels about the Tories campaign.
Genuinely can't believe he's been as bad as he is. Frankly, like he could have done better just by saying nothing at all.
Yeah. Do you think it was just a strange time to even call the election? I mean, it was annoying for me because we started having this idea about a broadcast about 3 weeks before he called it, and we thought we might have until November, and suddenly, oh my goodness, it's now. So he didn't even need to call it, really, did he?
I mean, I can kind of see why he did. Oh, sorry.
You go.
Oh yeah, I just wonder if he knows something, is there something going to happen? It feels like he's doing it on purpose. It's just like he wants out and wants to get away, and he's doing it on purpose.
I think that's being very kind to him. I think he knows nothing.
Things that, I mean, there are strategic reasons why calling now rather than later was potentially a good idea, in as much as Rwanda is the obvious one, because he gets to basically do this before the latest version of let's send them all to Rwanda fails to pan out, as it definitely will, because it's a terrible idea and it can't possibly be removing 100,000 people as he wants.
So are you saying he's called it knowing he's going to lose whenever he calls?
No, I think he's called it hoping that he can win before the results of the Rwanda policy come out. And not just the Rwanda policy either. You've got various kind of economic problems coming down the line. You've got just the ongoing incompetence of his government just continuing to weigh down on him. The longer it goes on, as we've seen on the election itself, the longer it goes on with this lot in charge, the more people are reminded and have it hammered home to them that there's been 14 years of this nonsense. I think it's a gamble, but it's not entirely a senseless one, I think.
What about the rise of reform? Anyone want to talk about that?
I'm already in the post-election phase. I'm already thinking about what's going to happen after the Conservatives are completely smashed. And what I'm worried about is that Reform is going to constantly be there, lurking, dragging the Conservatives to the right, dragging Keir Starmer to the right, because Keir Starmer is a tragically scared man who is constantly worried that the public actually hate him and actually hate Labour, and that he's got to keep on cringing and fawning, otherwise he'll get horribly battered. So even if he gets into Downing Street with a huge sort of majority that like Saddam Hussein usually used to get, he'll still be like, oh, but Reform has 12%, and then he'll be justifying all of these like awful policies by saying, well, we've got to appeal to blah, 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 blah. And it's going to be like shadow boxing with the ghost of Boris Johnson that isn't even there anymore. So I would like Reform to do really badly, just so that they're not there to be pulling everything towards the abyss afterwards, and constantly keeping everything fixed on immigration and hating trans people.
I think there's a question to be asked in terms of the general sort of far-right trend that we're seeing at the moment, right? So as we've been reporting as well, now we have effectively a far-right government in the Netherlands that's being enabled by the Christian Democrats, by the Farmers' Party, and the other sort of right-wing and center-right parties. We have sort of effectively far-right government in Italy, which is right now being the sort of quiet example. We're not so bad, it can't be that bad. We've got, of course, the extreme right fascist government in Israel, which has taken the region to unprecedented levels of murder, death, and destruction. We've got an EU parliamentary elections, which, although the shift hasn't been dramatic, we are seeing again, this dynamic of the center-right becoming an enabler of the far-right on the EU level. And of course, in France, where the successes of the Rassemblement National, the former National Front, in the EU election has pushed Macron into this ill-fated call of a snap elections, which, feel like him, like some of the protesters that we've been covering in Freedom this morning said that Macron has been the arsonist of the political system, was basically rolled out the red carpet for the far right. Now, in France, we've seen over the last couple of days, mass demonstrations, hundreds of thousands of people in dozens of cities come out against the far right. And that kind of causes me to ask, okay, so what's actually going on? Is the far right an actual looming threat? And are we really, or a present threat? And are we indeed experiencing the 30s in reverse? Some kind of 2.0 global anti-fascist struggle, with the potential disaster of Trump winning in the United States, and again, proceeding to dismantle whatever is left of the institutions of American electoral nominal democracy? Or are these aftershocks? Are we experiencing the farce rather than the tragedy on our way down the other side of the peak of human civilization? Right?
These aren't very good far-right movements, are they? They're not actually themselves assembling huge rallies. They're not militant. They're not taking the streets. They don't have a solid base. They are essentially a horrible fungus infection which is growing in the host body of democracy, which has been tragically weakened by neoliberalism. This is a post-viral infection because the Conservatives and the Labour have destroyed the necessary basis for democracy. They've destroyed civil society. So now any kind of shit is just growing. We saw this with the anti-vax protests. stuff is so destroyed and denatured that any kind of nonsense just grows.
I mean, I think that's more extreme in this country, of course, right? Where there really has been a much more thorough decimation of civil society than you'll find in continental Europe. But then there's also a generational dynamic there, which I think is detectable. So, we have a lot of talk about how there is overall a shift to the left the younger you get. I'm not sure if that's true about, China or Israel, for that matter, where things seem to be shifting to the right. But I don't have an answer to this, right? My kind of the end point of the analysis is that I'm baffled. And it feels like, we are literally on this sort of tipping point where we can't really know to which new valley or to which new point of dynamic equilibrium, if at all, this
But
ball
look,
is
I
going to
live in
roll.
I live in Sweden. Sweden is a very cohesive society with very strong structures, incredibly high level of public trust. And here, the conservatives and the generic centre right have successively destroyed themselves and then recompositioned themselves. It's like, okay, well, if we squish ourselves together, then we have 60% of the vote, and then they destroy themselves. Okay, if we squish ourselves together, we have 45%, and they destroy themselves. And then they're like, okay, well, if we plus the centre right squish ourselves, so they constantly keep on destroying themselves. And you see this in France as well. The guy who has locked himself in the building in France to avoid getting locked out is like the successor to the successor to the successor party of Gaullism. They keep on destroying themselves and having to recomposite themselves because they don't have anything to offer, and they keep on like pulling their own pants down whenever they're in government. Nobody actually can deliver on the promises.
I mean, this is so I don't know whether you've seen kind of the circle of of political economy essentially, which has been going on for quite a long time now, of pretty much since the left's economic position got destroyed. You've got this kind of revolving door of sort of the liberal or the centrist or the neoliberal wing, the technocrats, the ones which are about to win in Britain, get in. They find themselves unable to cope with the economic problems of Britain are not solvable through economic centrism. We know this because it's been attempted multiple times and it hasn't worked. We've had a declining system each time. The problem with that is that it then destroys public trust, or from the perspective of a Democrat, if you like, is that it destroys public trust in the institutions. And this destroyed public trust in the institutions then empowers a more radical version of the far right to get into power, where they, as you say, pull their own pants down, because they also don't have any answers. Because they're still working within the same economic logics, ultimately, as the centrists are. And the left can't get a foothold because none of its answers make any sense either. You can talk about having a big state, but under an internationalist ruling class, people can move their capital away. Like the markets can simply threaten you until you do what they want. We saw this with Liz Truss. Liz Truss attempts to do something radical from the right, not from the left, but from the right, for her own side, and is told, no, you can't do that. We will collapse your economy if you do that. So she stops doing it. The left hasn't got any power to, so nobody trusts the left to run an economy. And you saw this with Corbyn to a great degree. Everyone was like, oh, they'll just spend us into the abyss and then we'll just have enormous debts. The centrists attempt to be technocrats and, practically minded, and they oversee a slow decline. The right then come in all guns blazing, saying we're going to strip the state back. We're going to be all the kinds of patriotic nationalists that you want us to be to fix the social problems. And then they can't fix it either. And then we get back to the centrists again. And it goes on and on. And the big fear I have is that this election essentially will give the centrists as big a majority as they will ever have, essentially, and they will screw it up because they've got no solutions. We've seen during the electoral cycle they've got no solutions. this is what all this "we're not going to promise anything" is about, because they can't promise to fix things because they've got the money. And when they fail, it opens the door for the Faragists, the Malonis of this world, the Orbans, to say, well, the centrists can't fix anything. Who have you got left to turn to? So maybe in 4 to 5 years, maybe in 8 to 10, they're back in a position where they can be voted in, and they will bring about a dead-on far-right position.
Yes,
We kind of saw this
exactly it.
with
This could be
Boris Johnson.
Britain's
Johnson was
Obama
kind of
moment.
doing that on a lighter level.
But what's weird right now is that in order to fix the economy, there's all of these like mainstream economic think tanks and the Financial Times itself just screaming things like, just take a little bit of state control, just put a little bit of control in, do some actual investment. Actually, there's a screaming out of ability to invest and actually make profit. But right now, the rate of profitability has been totally stripped. And so the only people who actually elite and have lots of money are the renting people who are making money off of things like privatized utilities. So we've got an extremely decadent, unproductive ruling class right now, desperate to hang on to the privileges it made from the 40 years fire sale of neoliberalism of public assets and the hollowing out of the state. So I would say, Simon, I differ slightly. I don't think it's the markets or any sort of deep working of capital that keeps on smacking governments back into line. I think it's this parasitic, unproductive version of a capitalist class, which has got such a stranglehold, for example, represented in Britain by its hold on the media and on so-called public opinion that keeps on doing this. While at the same time, you've got another part of the ruling class represented by, for example, people within the Financial Times and the Economist who are saying, well, look, you could get things back together, but if you just implemented a few sensible reforms. But the politicians, like Mr. Haunted Ham Sandwich Keir Starmer, are too scared to actually do this. And because they are politically too scared, because they themselves have no political capital, because they don't dare to create the kind of political momentum that would give them that capital, then they're going to be powerless, they're going to get swept away, and then we could have British Trump in another 4 or 5 years.
I am not entirely sure that I'm a fortune teller. I find it really hard to predict the future in politics. And certainly what people have said makes sense. It's logical. But
We can do another
so many
podcast in 5 years and find out if we were right or not. And if you're watching this in 5 years' time, I hope I'm not right, okay? You from the future.
I think one of the really interesting things that is going to happen if we end up with one of the more outlandish predictions of the election, that the Liberal Democrats become the official opposition and the Tories effectively collapse, is we don't know what Tories are going to be left, and we don't know what direction they're going to go in. It might be that they go in a Farage direction, but it kind of does depend on who's left as well. And so there are scenarios which are a little less bleak. Let me just say that. I'm not convinced they're likely either. One of the things that is going to be fascinating, if that happens, if we're seeing a change in our two-party system and the Tories are no longer one of the two main parties, we have to remember that we've got a very much a conservative establishment. And what happens with that establishment is difficult to say. Do they suddenly switch sides to the Liberal Democrats? Well, it won't happen suddenly. But newspapers, the media in general, is largely Tory supporting. They're not gonna stop supporting Farage, for example, or promoting him. So I think it could go in all sorts of different directions, if that makes sense. So I'm being maybe a bit more positive, am I? I don't know.
I think it's entirely possible that Keir Starmer, who absolutely worships government, he worships government and sensibleness and organisation. He could turn out to be a complete badass and just like whip everything into shape and like put everything on a war footing and like, okay, now we're going to totally go with the Green New Deal. It could happen. The state as an institution has this amazing ability to defend itself, and it could be that that's the kind of positive version of that we'll see. So that's my more positive take on it.
So maybe we ought to start to wind things up. a little bit. What are people expecting on election night once we get there? Who wants to go first?
Well, you just said who wants to go first, so
Well, it worked beautifully, didn't it? What a fantastic mistake.
what am I expecting on the election night? I'm expecting the Conservatives to do a lot better than the polls show, because they always do, don't they? You know, people don't admit that they vote Conservative, but they do. I don't think they're going to win. I think Labour will win, but I do think that the Tories won't do as badly as they're predicted to do, probably.
Are you going to get more interested in the campaign as it gets closer?
Probably, yeah. I'm probably going to get quite excited on election night. I mean, how are we going to run I'm quite interested. The audience might be interested too. How we're going to run this thing? Is it going to be like reactions? You know, we're going to be up watching it all night, going, "Ooh."
Well, I think the way that it will work is that
It's
we
be
are
like
going to be
Gogglebox.
a second screen for people, aren't we? That people are going to be watching it on the BBC, and Lucas is going to get his swingometer out. And
I mean, I've got 2 screens, but I don't have a TV license. Am I going to have to get one? How am I going to watch it? I don't have a telly. I don't have a TV license.
Let's be careful what we say right now on that front. Yeah, who knows?
Okay, sorry.
No, I think it'll be really interesting on the night. Sorry, Lucas.
Well, watch it on the internet on a non-British channel.
Okay,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all the election debates and stuff I've just been watching on YouTube and
on Guardian Live or whatever. Everyone's got TV channel nowadays.
Yeah, I've never had a television since I was, since I left home. People think it's weird. I don't really have the concentration span for watching stuff. But yeah, the other thing, I'm looking forward to seeing the Red Wall being lost, because I think that was ridiculous when that went over to the Tories, and thinking in terms of the connection of sort of electoral politics to social movements, seeing the Red Wall go blue and just knowing that is, was kind of a sort of populist, kind of possibly xenophobic social movement connected to that. And it just seemed really sad. So I'm pretty sure that's going to go red again, and I'm glad about that.
I think so. I mean, a lot of those seats seem to fall partly because all the traditional Labour voters had given up on Labour, the more social conservative kind of Labour voters. But Labour are ahead in every single age group now, which is unprecedented, really. So anything could happen on that. I'm imagining they'll get the Red Wall seats back for sure. Okay, Simon, what are you looking forward to? What are you expecting?
I mean, yeah, similar to Rhiannon. I think a lot of unless reform is polling exceptionally well, I think most of the reform support will melt away, because people will decide the natural Tory base, which is currently saying we'll vote for reform, will probably show more discipline than that when they come to the actual polls, when it comes down to it. I wouldn't be surprised if the Greens got Bristol. I think they will. It sounds like they're going to struggle with Brighton, at least in part because their council, Sir John, there has not been tremendously successful.
But they're doing well in parts of Suffolk as well.
The Greens picked up Mid Suffolk District Council, which I don't know whether that will translate to an MP. I think they're probably always off that as yet. Deepest, darkest Suffolk is pretty blue. It's one of those sets of places.
Is that Therese Coffey's area? Is that her?
Among others, yeah. Used to be Ben Gummer was that kind of area as well. I don't think Labour will have quite the thumping victory that the polls are currently suggesting, but it'll be pretty heavy.
I'm not going to make predictions, but what about you, Lucas? What are you looking forward to?
Yes, I am looking forward to the uncertainty, because it does seem like the Conservatives are pretty much certain to lose, but we don't really know by how much, because we're beyond the twilight zone now. Are they going to collapse? There's a point of which, like, all their voters just go, well, what's the point of voting and so on. But the polls right now, yes, they do. They just reflect what people are saying to the pollsters, and it does actually mean how they're going to vote. I mean, ironically, that's also what Joe Biden is hoping right now. He's hoping that people are actually lying when they say they won't vote for him, and they're actually going to dribble back to him. So, but that means that for us on election night, it'll be exciting to actually see the reality unfold, the hard data. Whereas all we've got is polling. And the thing about the Greens and maybe a few other parties is that because the Labour victory seems so baked in, and because Keir Starmer has turned off the left so much, there could be an awful lot more of non-Labour voting, especially more Labourish places, but also a certain amount of blue places going towards the Greens as well. So it'll be interesting to see because this could be part of the whole breakup of the two-party system in Britain, and so yeah, like we've got a map, but I want to see, like, now then we can actually go and hit that coastline and see whether it actually it's the same shape. It's going to be great fun.
Cool. That's a good place to end it. I'm going to press the end button. And so thank you, everybody, for contributing. We will come back in 3 weeks' time, and it might be a late night, but it'll be an interesting night. And it would be nice if we see some Conservative cabinet ministers losing their jobs, wouldn't it? All right. Thank you very much, everyone.